Thank you very much. I just wanted to begin by saying a quick thank you to Matt and Adam for this amazing conference that they've organized, and thank you, of course, to the sponsors. Thank you all for being here. What do you call someone who helps someone else? What about someone who inspires you? Or someone who overcomes a health challenge or an obstacle to personal or professional success? Or someone who does a difficult or a dangerous job? Too often, I think, we just call all of these people heroes. For a great many people, all behavior that's seen as distinctly difficult or unusually impressive tends to be classified as heroic. Everyone from firefighters to parents to freedom fighters are our heroes. And too often, these individual assessments of heroism seem to be all that really matter. This person is my hero, someone will say, and that's all we need to know to conclude that the person is, in fact, a hero. But I'm going to be a little bit controversial here this morning and argue that a fair number of our heroes aren't really all that heroic, and also that we might be missing out on some heroes. Our thinking about heroism is at once too broad and too narrow. The first distinction I want to draw is between someone who is a hero and someone who is your hero. Most of the time, your hero is someone you admire, a role model, or someone you idolize. And this is, of course, entirely up to you. Your role models will almost always be different from my role models because of our very different life experiences. If we ask people to list their heroes, we'll get all kinds of different answers. We might agree with some of those, we might disagree with all of them. But that won't really matter for a discussion of heroism, because all we've learned at the end of the day is that different people all have different reasons for admiring or idolizing people. If I love basketball, I might admire LeBron James. If I'm a tennis player, I might idolize Roger Federer. As a professional philosopher, maybe Plato. Unquestionably, I look up to and I want to be like my terrific parents. In order to convey to others how much we really admire these people, and because the word idolize tends to come across negatively, we use the best sounding and the most powerful words that we can use. And so instead of saying that these are our role models or that we admire them, we call them our heroes. And then if anyone attempts to question our choices, we claim that heroism is relative. But heroism isn't relative. It's our decisions about how to dole out our admiration and our respect that are. We might respect someone at one time and then withdraw our respect later. I might have been impressed by Senator John McCain's maverick political positions when he campaigned against George W. Bush in 2000. But not all that impressed by John McCain's recent arguments against the DREAM Act or the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. If I previously admired McCain, I might be disillusioned and I might not admire him any longer. But this is different from arguing that John McCain wasn't heroic in his endurance of torture during his imprisonment during the Vietnam War. Whether or not I admire McCain doesn't impact whether or not that was heroic. And this leads to my second, and I think very much related point about what heroism actually looks like. While some people are content to call anyone who does anything noteworthy a hero, other people require heroes to do something that assists other people. But in my book, I argue that we have some difficulty separating one sort of hero from another, and this leads to confusion about what to expect from our heroes. We would do well to untangle one kind of heroic behavior from another to give ourselves the ability to consider the full range of heroism. John McCain is, again, a good example of our problem. If you remember, people went through his Vietnam War record pretty extensively during the campaign in 2008, and most people came to the decision that John McCain was a war hero. But the truth of the matter is that he was a very different sort of hero from someone like John Kerry, whose war record was also very sort of publicly talked about. Kerry's heroic stature came from actions that he took in the midst of battle. But McCain's heroism came as a result of his imprisonment. To be clear, McCain wasn't particularly successful as a warrior. Though he was injured in the line of duty like John Kerry, he didn't successfully complete his mission the way Kerry did. His plane was shot down, he was captured and tortured, he suffered a great deal at the hands of his captors over several years. Rather than accomplishing some sort of impressive deed on the battlefield, his heroism is that of a survivor, one who has the ability to endure terribly difficult conditions or challenges. His image was tarnished a lot, McCain's, in the years that followed these presidential campaigns, largely because of our, I think, mistaken assumptions about heroism. There was this article about him in Vanity Fair, and it made the argument that McCain didn't stand for any particular position in particular or principle. He simply shifted with wherever the political winds were going. It said, here's a quote for you, "It's quite possible that nothing at all has changed about John McCain, a ruthless and self-centered survivor who endured 5.5 years in captivity in North Vietnam and who once said that his favorite animal was the rat because it's cunning and eats well." It's possible to see McCain's entire career as the story of a man who has lived in the moment, who never stood for any overriding philosophy in a consistent way, and who's been willing to do all that it takes to get what he wants. But I want to ask, why is it problematic that someone should be willing to do all that it takes to get what he wants? Why not choose the rat as your favorite animal? What's wrong with being cunning and eating well? These are precisely the attributes that allowed McCain to accomplish his heroic feats of endurance in Vietnam. And it's a mistake, I think, to assume that that endurance would somehow not be connected to the way he conducts himself now. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't criticize John McCain, the politician, just because he's related to John McCain, the hero who suffered and survived. Instead, it's to say that we should realize that those things that allowed his heroism might not make him the most noble politician in our eyes. We shouldn't be surprised that McCain continues to identify with the rat, who endures whatever life throws at him and attempts to take care of himself at any cost. But our problem is that we assume McCain's heroism is the straightforward heroism of the battlefield hero, who puts himself in harm's way, who fights bravely, and who's doing all those things very clearly and straightforwardly. I want to suggest then the traditional heroic categories have gotten kind of muddled up together, and that leads us to judge one sort of hero by the standards of another. So what I want to do is present those categories really quickly. And in my book, I make an argument for 3 distinct categories that we trace back to the earliest Western literature, the epic poetry of Homer and the dialogues of Plato. These are complex enough to resonate with us today, and I think to help us thinking about heroism. I talk about Achilles, the battlefield hero, Odysseus, the suffering hero, and Socrates, the other regarding hero. Achilles is this great man of action. He's the most excellent of the Greek warriors, and his actions win him eternal glory, while they also demonstrate the limits and the consequences of human action. He can't simultaneously earn a glorious name and live a long, contented life. It's one or the other. It's a fairly straight line to draw between the great deeds that he accomplishes on the battlefield and the image of him as heroic. But Odysseus, on the other hand, is singled out for unheroic behavior. He makes use of disguises. He employs trickery rather than fighting straightforwardly. And he's well known as someone who's willing to lie to achieve his objectives. His special kind of heroism lies in his will to survive, to suffer, and to endure the challenges that he faces. The lesson we should take away from reading the Odyssey and thinking about the life of its hero is that life is full of toil and suffering, but man should be able not only to endure, but also transform this suffering into a supreme achievement. And finally, Socrates is this third form of classical heroism that stands alongside the great Homeric heroes. Plato succeeds in putting forward his own heroic vision for 2 reasons. First, he suggests that Socrates has an intimate understanding, maybe even an appreciation, of his mortality. And he actively chooses the time when he'll die. And secondly, Plato demonstrates that in choosing to give up his life, Socrates sacrifices himself for the good of others, both his friends and even the people of Athens at large who seem to be his enemies. He explains this decision to several of his students, and it sets the example of a way to make good decisions, and it encourages them to continue to see the life of the philosopher as a good one. In the way that Plato sets up Socrates' trial and execution in these dialogues, he sets him up as a hero, one whose actions are distinctly other-regarding. And at the same time, like Homer's heroes, Socrates is clearly showing that the kind of life that a person lives, rather than how long a person lives, that's the most important thing. Now, unlike the Homeric heroes, Achilles and Odysseus, Socrates chooses to give up his life not for some personal good, but in order to do some good for others. So these are the three different categories of heroism in antiquity. And we've largely decided today that the most heroic behavior, the one that casts the best reflection back on the life of the hero, is one that puts a premium on providing assistance to others, even when doing that puts the hero directly at risk. Of the three classical archetypes, we see it as the most difficult to undertake because it divorces a person's own preferences from the actions that that person feels he or she has to do. It's also, seemingly, the type of heroism that anyone could undertake. You don't have to be a demigod like Achilles, or you don't have to fall victim to something particularly awful in order to be this sort of hero. Having said all of that, I think it would be a good idea to remember that heroism can encompass more than simply this other-regarding behavior we're seeking to cultivate. And at the same time, I think we ought to rein in our desire to use the word hero to describe anyone whose actions, whatever they are, impress us or make us feel good. Then we might find that the conversation about heroism and heroics in the news media, in popular culture, and in our daily lives will really start to make more sense. Gone, I hope, will be our habit of downplaying any heroism that isn't clearly other-regarding. And gone, I hope, also will be the kind of hero inflation that we've seen. That way, we might push back against the danger of meaningless that might begin to threaten the word hero. Thanks very much.